One of the practical and philosophical questions is whether to charge for design, how much to charge for design, whether to do free consultation. It's like there's a number of different ways of handling this. And I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of each. The first thing that I like about charging for design is that it corresponds to a reality that if you're a good designer, you can save someone $10,000 in 30 minutes by educating them about a possibility that they didn't know they didn't know. And this is the role of becoming an exceptional designer. Is your goal is to understand what that client really wants, how they're going to be using it, what's going to create value for them, and then to show them that in a way that they wouldn't do on their own, but that is more valuable and in some cases more economic. You can find someone just getting ready to do this, and you ask them why they're doing that, and you say, well, there's a way easier way to do that. It looks nicer, it's cheaper, it'll make you happier. But you didn't know that you didn't know about that. And so this is, I think, the first reason that I like to charge for design is it takes time. It takes digging to discover those opportunities on the site. It takes time, it takes opportunities to come up with the best ideas. And the way that I look at it is design is 10 cents on the dollar. It might take 20 minutes to think an idea through. We could do it this way, this way, this way, or this way. 20 minutes. But it might take a month to implement that 20 minutes of brainstorming. And if you come up with a better idea or a more cost-effective idea or one that adds more real estate value, it's so cheap, the amount of time it takes to come up with that idea. And so I consider design and strategy to be the single most valuable thing I bring to the table. I mean, it's worth $500 an hour particularly on big technical projects. It's worth a lot because, I redesign hotel lobbies all the time when I'm traveling in my mind. Breaking down the cost of materials, looking at the impact, comparing this 5-star hotel to another 5-star hotel. And it's constantly surprising to me that many of the most expensive designs are unpleasant. That someone might spend $1 million to make something less enjoyable than this other hotel lobby, etc., with the same amount of space and situation to work through. And so I think design is a really, really big deal. So that's, I think, the underlying reality. So I like to charge well for design because it is a really important thing. Now, on the flip side, we're a very materialistic culture. And so most clients within a materialistic framework don't get that design is a big idea, is a really big deal. Most clients are really excited if they get a free design, for example, relative to spend $5,000, but they're not upset that something they didn't know that they didn't know doesn't get built that they would like much better. So I would say that, to a certain extent, we're dealing with an uneducated culture when it comes to the value of design. And when you're dealing with an uneducated culture, doing an intelligent thing can cost you a political hit. And so I am aware that standing up for the value of design costs me installation jobs where I make the most money. Because I charge $175 an hour for design, and many people hear that and they're like, this other landscaper is going to do it a free design, or they're only going to charge me $50, and the client really thinks that the design would be the same, or that the experience level is the same, etc. And they're just focusing on that. And so, but that's an uneducated client. And so to a certain extent, one of my goals has been to have enough work that I could only work with educated clients, with clients that wanted to be intelligent in the project. And the first measure of that is a smart and experienced client will pay for design, and knows how valuable it is. So that's, a little bit of a pro and con. If work is on the slow side, I can easily create twice as much work by flipping from the $175 an hour model, which I do that hourly because it discourages a client from wasting my time. Very, very few clients at $175 an hour waste my time, is, I guess, the bottom line. And it discourages that. I mean, most and that's the next reason to pay hourly for design is when I started out, I actually did design for free or at a very low rate, and I would have things like clients arriving late. They'd arrive 30 minutes late because that was wasting my time and they weren't paying anything. And so now the other thing is we're in a mindset as a culture that if you don't pay for it, it's not valuable. And so there's another, benefit to charging for design. So I'd say it breaks down to a good design is probably the single best return on investment for an entire project. Because a design, a terrible design versus a good design will determine 90% of the value. So a client says, here's $50,000. You can spend that in a terrible design to actually make things worse and do something that's going to have to be redone in a period of years and cause problems, safety problems, a whole variety of things. So you can spend $50,000 and make things worse and not even understand it because you didn't have a good dialogue process to understand why things are being done and what the pros and cons are. And you can spend that same $50,000 to make things absolutely stunning in a given area or a whole area of a garden, depending on the size and all of that. The difference is in the design. And all good design is an intelligent pattern of decision-making that gives the client as much value as possible for the time and money and hassle invested. That is a good design. And to some extent, this is personal. That's why I engage a lot with my clients with a questionnaire and things like that. It's a very personal thing. To some extent, that is not personal. If a deck material rots out 3 times faster and costs 3 times more, that's a bad decision. If something requires 10 times more maintenance and is ugly, that's a bad decision. So there's objective metrics to design, and then there's personal things. There's personal things like, yeah, I know petunias are out of style, but I remember them with my grandmother. My grandmother used to have petunias, and I think of her every time I see petunias, and she was such a nice woman, and so I want petunias. And that's a subjective value because you're going to give maybe the client the happiest moment in the whole garden by putting petunias regardless of whether they, quote, go there or not. And so that's an area where the subjective aspect of the design is more important than the objective, if you care about your client and actually want to bring them joy for the time and money they spend. So you charge money for design, and it correlates with reality. Design is a big deal. Secondly, it teaches a client to respect your time and to respect your work. Thirdly, it locks a client in, meaning if someone has just paid me $2,000 to design their garden, it tells me we have a rapport. It tells me they want to work together. And the odds that they're going to pick me for their installer are significantly higher than if I, along with a bunch of other people, just throw out some free ideas. And the client, as an uneducated participant, doesn't really know which ideas are better because they can't really visualize any of them. And they just pick someone. Why? Because they like their truck, or what was it? You don't even know, because they often don't know. So if someone hires me for design, 90% or more of the time they're going to hire me for installation. And so working only with people that want to pay for design also helps me invest and start preparing to help that client, because I know they're going to work with me. The other thing that I like about paying for design is that I'm going to spend more time than if it's a free project, a free design project, a free consult. I'm going to really get to know the client. In the process of getting to know the client is also going to get to know me. And there's going to be a relationship of trust and rapport. That trust and rapport is going to be incredibly handy when the client drives home and we've torn up the whole yard and cut down trees and moved stuff around, and it looks terrible. And they're asking themselves, oh my gosh, have I just spent $100,000 to ruin everything because, the first step is demolition and transformation? Well, having spent hours of trustworthy rapport in the design process, they're going to say, well, he obviously knows what he's doing. If I'm just coming in flat on a bid, for example, if I've just spent a little bit of time on a free design, etc., we don't have that rapport. And I don't know my client well enough. If I'm doing a thorough design, I'm going to spend at least 5 hours in the presence of my client. In that process, I'm going to be learning their body language. I'm going to be understanding, wow, they get really nervous every time. This client is irrationally, it doesn't matter. But this client is 8 out of 10 nervous around anything around this oak tree. Now, that she's afraid it's going to fall on the house. It's not. That doesn't matter. She's 8 out of 10 anxious that it will. Well, if I understand that because we talk about it in the design process and I get to know them, then I'm going to do hand-holding when we're working around the oak tree. Why? So that she doesn't associate pain, stress, and anxiety with my company. Because that's how bodies work. If you make someone really nervous, rationally or irrationally, they just associate that when they're around you or working together, they get really nervous. Well, naturally, that doesn't feel very good. So they're not going to like you as much and, refer you warmly, etc. And so I like the chance to get to know my clients. I want to spend the time. I want to work with intelligent clients. I want people to understand just how valuable the idea is. And so that's all on the camp of charging well for design. On the other hand, there is no doubt about it that you can, with anxious clients that don't know how good design is, you can give them, for example, a fixed design fee. Like, okay, I will design this garden for $800, or I will, whatever it is, a fixed design fee. That's clearly low. That's not going to stress the client out. And they kind of like you, and they don't want to be rushed, and they don't want the hourly thing, like $175 an hour. And it's like, what if it took 30 hours and, this and that, and well, who knows? It's just out of control. Okay, I'll design your project for $900. And you'll have a design that you like at the other side, and I'll talk with you and work. You can develop the rapport in that way. And yes, a little bit more time will tend to be wasted, and yes, the client's going to ask for a little bit more because they're not paying for it. But the positive side of that is, again, even if they're paying a flat fee for design, the positive side of that is they feel more predisposed to you. Like if they waste 3 hours of your time in design and you go the extra mile at the beginning of the project and change their mind, they feel really confident that working with you is going to be a good experience. And so they're significantly more likely to pick you for the bid and the installation. And if they have wasted a lot of your time in design, etc., you can just bid the project a little bit higher because they're not going to switch to someone else for 10%. And in many cases, if you have a good rapport, you can. They're not even going to work with other bids at all. And the final reason that I really like doing design as opposed to just coming in and giving a bid for someone else's design, which means I get to know the client for maybe 20 minutes, then I'm giving a bid. The reality is that a project is never just a project. It is the project plus both clients if they're a couple dynamic. And some couples are a mess in terms of this. Now, I want to know what I'm dealing with. I want to know who my client is before I bid the project, because they can be beautiful or a complete pain in the neck. And I'm going to charge more for a pain in the neck client, but I'm going to learn what a pain in the neck they are in the design process. If they forget half of the things that I say, it tells me I've got to video everything and upload them video links, because I don't want to be having them complain at the end of the job that they never said that, but they did. And so we're going to have to video this client, because even in the design stage, they've forgotten half the things they said. We're going to have to take photos. We're going to send email updates. And so the way that you conduct a job should be to do everything you said well, to make good decisions, and to not leave a big loophole for a client to feel cheated, even if they're not cheated. You don't want to leave the loophole for them to feel cheated. I had a neighbor that let me drive heavy machinery over their driveway, for example. And I took very careful, high-resolution photographs of all the cracks in their driveway. Because sure enough, as soon as the equipment is out of there, the neighbor comes over and says, "I think you damaged my driveway." What do they want? A whole new driveway? And that's when I produced, the photos. And I said, these are exactly what is there. Now, I knew, of course, that the machinery couldn't affect that driveway, but they didn't. You see, and if they have the slightest sense that maybe they're being cheated, and if they're right, they get a whole new free driveway, it's a nightmare, for that kind of a situation. And so you want to, document things. Doing a thorough design process will tell you an enormous amount about your client, how decisive or indecisive they are, how integrated they are with themselves. If they keep saying they want to save money but keep adding things that cost money, they're not very integrated. Because if they're integrated and they say they want to save money, then they'll delete things out and ask what the cheapest thing is and take the cheapest thing and do it. Or they'll say they'd like to spend lots of money, and they'll spend lots of money. And so that's an integrated, easy to work with client. So I hope that helps. And for you, what's your point on that continuum? Do you like charging a lot for design, a little for design, hourly, flat fees? What are the pros and cons of your system?